All right. Oops. So here's tonight's panel. They will each be introducing themselves to you. We really want to thank them. It's starting to get to be the busy time of year for landscapers. And so thank them for taking time out to be with us. We've got Cain from Southwest Montana down near Dillon and Glen, Beth MacFawn from the Bozeman area, Linda Iverson from Big Timber, Shiva Solaimanian from Whitefish, and Giles Thelen from Missoula. Now, I really want to point out that although we have these 5 folks gathered here, we have a host of other professionals around the state, and we don't mean to leave anyone out. And so if anyone's on here tonight and you want to introduce yourself in the chat and mention your line of work and the region you work in, we would welcome that introduction. You could put your website or contact info. It'd be helpful to our audience and a great way to connect if you're involved in native plant landscaping. All right, well, with there, I'm going to unshare my screen so we can see the participants. We hope I can unshare the screen. There we go. All right. Now where's Shiva?
She's right down here on the bottom. Yeah, on the bottom, next to you.
Oh, I need to spotlight Shiva. So let's see, add the spotlight there. All right.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Excellent. Okay. So here's our plan. We're slated to go till about 8:30. Each of the panelists is going to address a couple of questions. And then after that, those are questions from me. And then we'll address a bunch of pre-submitted questions. We had a lot of interest and people have submitted questions. And then we'll go to the audience. If there's time after that, we'll take your questions from the audience. So we'll see how it goes. So for you panelists, first off, we'll go alphabetically, I guess it's just easiest, but I'd like you each to take 5 minutes to introduce yourself and your work and share some of your favorite tips and advice and things you like to share about native landscaping. So Catherine, you can go ahead and start.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I want to introduce myself. I'm Cain. I'm a member of the Calypso chapter of the Montana Native Plant Society. I started my business, Southwest Montana Native Landscapes, in 2007. I started as a retail nursery of just native plants and also doing landscaping with native plants. I have a passion for native plants. I love them. And I've had that all my life. I grew up in California and then I moved to Montana, and I was originally a member of the California Native Plant Society and then in Montana Native Plant Society. And so just some tips for you if you want to get started on growing native plants. There are some things you need to do, and your homework's really important because the more you are prepared, the more successful you're going to be. It's not an instant thing. You have to really think about it and plan, and then you'll be really happy with the results. So you need to research your location and know your growing zone. And growing zones depend upon the lowest temperature during the winter for the most part. And so we used to be a zone 3 where I am in Southwest Montana, and now we're considered a zone 4. So, but it's just something, if you look at labels on plants, often they'll say the zone, and you should be familiar with that term. You also need to know your annual precipitation, and this includes both snow and rain, your precipitation. And for instance, in the last decade in Dillon, it has gone from 16 inches to 10 inches. That's just in 10 years. So we talk about global warming, and some of the effects are moving faster than others. And so you have to look into the future and say, okay, if it's going to be we're going to have longer periods of summer, longer periods of warm weather, our winters are going to get shorter, what am I looking at? So you need to plant accordingly to take that into account. So another thing is factors such as wind. You need to think about wind and where your storms come, especially your severe weather events, like sometimes we have in the center in the summertime, I'm sorry, here in Southwest Montana, we get these big wind events. We get incredible hailstorms, and we've even had 2 tornadoes where I am. I never thought I would live in Montana and have to see a tornado in southwestern Montana, but we've had 2 come at our house. So you have to think about the direction they're coming from and then maybe plant accordingly. And some things that are maybe more tender, you want to plant them in protected areas. You need to consider your herbivores. I have deer, elk, moose, pronghorn, rabbits, voles, mice, and the one I'd never thought about when I started planting was pack rats. And you can get plants that are not palatable to some of those herbivores. So there are plants that are available that you can plant and you don't have to worry so much about them. Pack rats are a problem because they just pick off the blooms, and I know they're around when my columbines start blooming, and all the columbines have been neatly nipped off and they're lying on the ground. Pack rats. So you need to plan for microclimates within your planting areas. And you think about, like, microclimates are just areas where it's maybe a little bit different as far as temperature. Maybe it's warmer, it's more protected. Maybe it's colder because it's more exposed. So you can, like in back of rocks or in back of a hill, if you vary your terrain in your planting areas, you'll have more microclimates, and that gives you more variety of things that you can plant. You need to use your local resources. And in Montana, we're very lucky because we have an MSU extension agent for every county in Montana. And they have all kinds of resources available to you and publications. And also the Montana Native Plant Society, we were talking about our site online. You can learn about doing all kinds of things as far as planting, and like how to get rid of a lawn, or where you can buy native plants in your area. It's a really great resource. And also the online site of the Montana Native Heritage Program in Helena is very good too, with descriptions of all the different plants and gives you specifications about the plants. So I believe personally that variety is the spice of life, and that the more variety you can have when you plan your planting of natives is important. I like colors kind of in big blocks. I don't like dots everywhere. I like things where you maybe have 3 to 7 of each species of plant kind of planted in a block, so you get blocks of color. I like variety in textures. Think about leaf textures, leaf colors, grays versus green versus hairy things. That, and then, like, for instance, I'm in such a windy area that I tend to pick things that are lower in height because those work better. So there's a lot of things like that, the little details, and you can vary you start with a flat site and you can vary it just by putting rocks in and hills and things, and making it very different from what you started with. So anyway, good luck, and on to the next.
Linda?
All right. Well, hi, and thanks for tuning in tonight, and thanks for your interest in native plants. I'm Linda Iverson. I live northeast of Big Timber, where I'm really lucky to live in an area. I have a small ranch that's surrounded by native vegetation. I have lots of open prairie with lots of blue bunch wheatgrass and western wheatgrass and all kinds of wonderful forbs that bloom. And I have a forest with ponderosa pines and junipers and ancient old trees. So I am super lucky, and I think that's been a huge inspiration for me in my business as a landscape designer. I mostly work in South Central Montana. I've done a huge variety of landscaping over the years, residential, commercial, but I think really what my favorite kind of landscaping to do is where I seed back the native grasses and wildflowers into what I call kind of wildscapes in both rural and urban settings. I think it just reminds me of home. So it's been my passion. So I'm going to give you a few tips on that, on kind of seeding grasses and wildflowers, native ones. So the first tip is to learn the plants. And I didn't have a big background in botany. And so I learned all about native plants from the Montana Native Plant Society. And I went on numerous field trips and listened to botanists describe how to identify plants. And so that was my background and how I got familiar with plants. So that's a great recommendation to you to learn plants. And another tip is that this takes time. Revegetation is not instant. It's not rolling out bluegrass. It takes up to 3 years to really establish a community of grasses and wildflowers. And so you need to know that that's going to be the timeline you'll want to plan for. And also, I recommend you start small, especially if you're renovating like a already existing landscape. Just take a little section at a time rather than the whole thing, and try to phase the landscape in. And that brings me to the fact that in order to do this kind of wildscaping with native grasses and wildflower seeding, you have to remove the existing foliage, or you have to get rid of it, or they can't compete. So if you built a new home or something, that's already done for you. But if you're working on existing landscape, you need to remove those plants. However you do it, that has to be done before you can really start. So that's a thing to factor in. And if you, and also, I guess, in thinking about that, about this whole thing, is that you can't replicate exactly what you've seen out there in the wild. You're not going to get that same look. It's going to be your own version. And so I have a lot of fun with it. I sometimes even add non-natives, but I just use a variety of plants, and some of them seeds, some of them are planted. But the main thing is diversity, and you're getting away from that monoculture of lawn where you're just having one kind of plant. There's no broadleafs. You're constantly fertilizing and watering. So that's important to remember. And also the maintenance. A lot of people think this kind of native landscaping, native wild lawns are no maintenance, but they're actually KNOW maintenance. You have to know how to take care of it. And so a lot of it is watering, knowing how to water, kind of replicating nature and doing the deep soak and then letting things kind of dry out in between. That's what they like. A lot of people think you don't mow, and that's kind of a myth, because you need to mow like in the establishment phase in order to keep all that initial growth of weeds down, so it won't compete with all your little seedlings. So mowing is important then, and also mowing to control height sometimes is important, especially if you live in town, and then also mowing to remove the foliage of the season's growth. But all in all, it's a wonderful way to bring nature back into town, or to blend into your rural surroundings that maybe you're already native, instead of having just this lawn and then the native. It's a wonderful way to kind of buffer. It's a great place for wildlife and pollinators. So I highly recommend it, even though it does take extra time and passion. So hopefully that will help you. Okay.
Okay, Beth.
Hi, I'm Beth MacFawn in Bozeman. I've been in the landscape business since 1998. I moved out here to go to school at MSU for the landscape design program. And my passion is natives, just seeing the textures and the colors and the variety. And that's my focus, but not solely. And I wanted to share just a few of, it was hard to narrow it down, but I wanted to share a few of my favorite native perennials, one of which is a cleome. It's an annual, Cleome seriolata. It's a lovely late summer blooming bee-loving blossom. And it's an aggressive cedar. If you water it too much, it can set its seed for the next season quite readily. But the bees love it. and it has a very unique leaf form. So I also use a lot of different textures in my designs, trying to replicate the native grasslands and prairies. And another favorite of mine is Pearly Everlasting, Anaphyllus, and it dries really nicely in the fall. So if you're looking for any bouquets or dried arrangements, it's a great one. It's rhizominous, so it spreads quite readily. It's not very drought tolerant. It can tolerate some inundation of water. And then another favorite of mine is the spotted gay feather, Liatris punctata. And it's a lovely, dry, drought tolerant, late blooming summer blossom that, again, the bees love. It's a great pollinator plant. And it has a really nice vertical form, which is a nice addition of shape in a landscape. Another one is the milkweed, Asclepias speciosa. It can tolerate an inundation of water and then dry out, and it has a big, bold leaf. So it also has great form, and it's, as many of you may know, is the food source for the monarch butterflies. And the seed pod is quite lovely in the late fall, kind of winter landscape. That's it.
We'll switch over to Shiva.
All right. Hi, everybody. First of all, I agree with what everyone before me has said. I'm just nodding my head, being like, yep, 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 and yep. I kind of just came up with a list of the first things that came to my mind when considering native plant landscape design. And really one that everyone has touched on is just familiarizing yourself with native species and with your site. I feel like every time I think about what would I tell people, this is always what I come back to. It's like very difficult to plan something if you don't know what you're dealing with. So familiarize yourself with bloom time, color, height, spread, soil needs, sun requirements, its growth habit. What is your site like? What's the drainage like, aspect, light. Again, it just can be difficult to plan something without knowing the plants first, which I realize takes some time, but I guess I forgot my intro, but I work for a company called Forestoration up in Whitefish, Montana, and we also run a native plant nursery called the Center for Native Plants. I mostly do residential landscape design, as well as occasional projects with community groups and schools or the city. And our website, the Center for Native Plants.com, is one of my greatest resources. I recommend anyone and everyone wanting to learn about native plants. It's such an awesome tool. We've been creating a library of our species that we carry and signs that go with it, so you can click on them and it gives a picture and talks about all the things that I just mentioned, like bloom time, color, habit, pollinator, everything. So that's where I have learned, honestly, a lot and refer to every day. So continuing with advice, I think it's really good to create goals. I find, anyone and everyone can be like, I want to create a garden, but then it's hard to know what exactly you should do with a space. I think you should actually think about what you want out of your landscape. Do you want to create a pollinator garden, a rain garden, provide food and habitat? Do you want to surround your patio with certain colors and textures? Just think about what you actually want out of the space and how you want to use it. My next one is patience, which a couple people have already touched on already. I really think that native plants can be slow to get established and bloom when you're starting from scratch. But one really successful method that we've had is if there's already an intact native plant community and you're planning to either build a new home or create something fresh. If it's for some reason that site has to get disturbed and altered, one thing we'll do is go in and harvest native sod chunks and set them aside, water them, take care of them until the build site is pretty much completely finished. And then the last piece that goes in is the plants, and we'll actually put those native plant communities back in place. It's like one of the quickest ways that you can kind of get that instant-ish landscape. But I mean, I still don't really like using that term because it still takes time for them to establish, and there's shock from being moved, and any disturbed site is probably going to have some presence of invasive species. So like Linda mentioned, like maintenance is huge. I think I tell a lot of clients that it's kind of like managing your expectations and what you think it'll look like versus what it might actually look like, and the time input involved to get it to be what you want to look like. Next, I think it's important to, while you're learning about the plants, feel open to forming connections with them. I think forming connections with plants creates connections with place. Take note of plants that you see when you're out on a hike or a bike ride. Take notes of smells or feelings. I feel like a lot of my favorite plants that I recognize the most and can remember the names the best of are ones that I knew as a child, or that I just have seen over and over again, or I've had some sort of like olfactory experience with. They say that memory is very tied to smell. So I think fragrance is something that can help build our plant memory knowledge. Another thing that has already been talked about too is that Linda had mentioned that plants may behave differently in our yards than you would see in the wild. We have like a 2-ish acre botanical garden that has natives and non-natives that we've been building for the last 5 years. And there's a whole native section. It's an incredible place. And it's some of the native plants, that whole site is receiving irrigation. And some of them are like gargantuan Godzilla plants. And you would not see them like that anywhere else. So I think that's one thing to note too. Like, why is this bee balm like 4 feet tall? And then like see it out on the prairie, it's like a foot or whatever. So yeah, okay. I don't know how much time I have left.
That's great. Thank you, Shiva. And we'll move on to Giles.
Hi, folks. Glad to be here. It's been a fun exercise to think about kind of my history with plants and what I can share with everybody out there. And, I moved here for graduate school like some of the other panelists back in '96. And then I got to work in Glacier in '99. And I was looking for frogs and salamanders in the backcountry there. And that was the first time I just remember being floored by native plants, gentians especially, just sitting there for lunch and just being amazed at the gentians. And that was my first experience remembering ever seeing a gentian. And I'm not going to remember the species, darn it, I should have looked it up, but the elephant head plant, I don't know if you've ever seen one of those, but in 2 Medicine, I remember seeing one. I'm like, that looks just like an elephant head. And I looked it up, and sure enough, that's a common name. And I remember that day, and it makes me remember everything about that day. Just that one plant next to a beaver dam in the 2 Med. And so and then I was able to come and work for the University of Montana's plant ecology lab for 11 years. And during that time, I started Native Yards, trying to rescue native plants from the housing developments in the hillsides around Missoula. And of course, to do something like that, you need a pretty full scale operation. So it turns into landscaping and restoration and just promoting native plants is what I say I do. I promote native plants, and that's what a great way to spend your days and to hang your hat on something like that. And so, the questions I don't know if all the folks out there were able to see, we've been asked 2 questions to kind of think about for you. And one is the work we specialize in, and then a few of the most important tips or best advice we can give you all about native landscaping. And so, I think we all specialize in native plants. I'm kind of a design build guy. I'm a stick figure drawer, so I can see a picture in my mind's eye, but I can't really put it down on paper. So I just wave my hands a lot to potential clients, and a lot of times they trust me to put in a landscape. And what the other panelists have said about managing expectations for native plant installations, and it's not very often we get a blank slate of being able to have a just fresh soil that you get to create something in. And you never know where that soil comes from. These people have this bare earth, and they're like, oh, what can we put? And little do they know that bare earth came from some pasture somewhere, probably, and it's just loaded with weed seeds and everything else. And the incredible pulse, if they don't get to it right away, the incredible pulse of weeds they'll have will be overwhelming. And that's where we come in, and sometimes they wait a few years, and then the seed bank is bad and all those things. And thinking about seed bank, I think that's something we all think about in terms of, we're talking about establishing native plants, and part of that is for those native plants to be able to drop their seeds and procreate. And something that I picked up in the research realm was there's kind of a key number for when you're planting native plants in terms of diversity. And it's like 10 plants per meter. If you have a square meter and you have 10 plants and they're different plants, and they can be ground covers or shrubs or trees or whatever, but I always try to target a real diverse number. And that number is usually like 10 plants. And what the research showed is that if you get that, a minimum of that number of plants, it really restricts the amount of invaders that can come in. And so if you don't want weeds and you want to just, do the awesome thing that a lot of us native plant gardeners get to do now, which is move your, weeding native plants. I've weeded so much smooth blue aster lately, and it's like, you want to keep them all, but there's just too many. And so one of the other pieces of advice I'd like to throw out there is that patience. My personal garden, which is only on 3 lots here in town, I have a 10-year plan. I'm in year 9 of my 10-year master plan. And it's been a pretty satisfying process if you don't, get down on yourself, or if you see what we call garden cancer or campanula here, if you see it in your yard, it's okay to have a little bit of that, and that you'll get it, next time. And so it's a process trying to create a sanctuary for yourself and for the critters out there. And so I think the best advice is diversity and patience, and knowing if you have a new situation that just keeping on top of the weeding, it's going to be pretty intense for the first season, but it'll decrease over time. Just like those beautiful cleomes that Beth mentioned, they're awesome, but unfortunately they blink out in an established landscape over time, at least in mine, and they just find like the cracks and things like that. So I guess that's my 2 cents on me and advice. Thanks.
Great. Well, excellent advice from all you guys. I know that's super helpful to me, and I'm sure everybody else. Next, I'm going to ask you each to talk about a few, if you haven't already, a few of your favorite workhorse native plants for your area and why you like them. And then also, if you care to share any favorite books or websites or other resources that you might have please do. And then I will ask the panelists after you speak, it'll be helpful for the audience if you can write some of these things in the chat, if you have websites or anything that you want to share, or your own website or whatever. So we can go ahead and Catherine, you can start again. So you need to unmute yourself. Your little microphone. We can't hear you.
Lower left.
Yeah, for most people, it's lower left on your screen. We can't hear you. Sorry about that. Why don't we skip? Let's let you. We can't hear you, so we'll.
Oh, no, it here. Okay.
There we go.
Oh, there you go. Just
A
gonna
little
skip
message.
ahead.
A little message just came up that said unmute. I was clicking and clicking it. So anyway, sorry, folks. Anyway, some of my favorite plants I'm going to go through real quick. And again, you've got my contact information on chat right now. So one of my very favorites is called the common twin pod, and it's in the mustard family, and it's a kind of a high ground cover, and it's Physaria didiomocarpa variety lanata, and it has beautiful little yellow blooms, and the foliage is very gray and kind of triangular, and then the seed pods look just like popcorn, and when they dry out, they blow around your yard, and it looks like popcorn blowing around your yard, except it's spreading your ground cover. And it starts blooming usually in March, April, and it blooms until the snow flies, until it's covered with snow. And it stays kind of evergreen all through the winter. And in the summertime, it goes through 3 to 4 cycles of that, with blooming and then seed pods, blooming, then seed pods. And it's totally delightful. I just love it. It's very favorite. Another good ground cover is wild strawberries, Fragaria virginiana. And it spreads rapidly by these red runners, and you get these really pretty little white flowers, and then it makes strawberries that if you can beat the mice to them, you can have them. I like to incorporate flowers and plants that pollinators love, and one that I really like in my area because it's so dry down here is silver scorpion weed, and it's Phacelia hastata, and it's great for bumblebees and wasps and our native bees. It has lavender flowers and really pretty silver foliage, nice different kind of growth shape to it. I highly recommend that. An annual that we've already talked about, a lot of us have talked about, is the bee plant, Cleome cerulata. And that's the one that Beth mentioned and Giles mentioned it. And it has magenta flowers, and it's wonderful to plant around a vegetable garden or around your fruit trees. And because you're weeding around those areas, that tends to stay there for year upon year. It reseeds itself really well. It's an annual, but it reseeds itself very well. And you'll get new plants every year. So that's a really good one. For color, I love sulfur buckwheat, and that is Eriogonum umbulatum variety aureum. And it has brilliant yellow blossoms with gray foliage. And it's really attractive. It's very different. And I know that you would love that one, sulfur buckwheat. Don't forget grasses. My favorite grass is Indian rice grass. And that's, let's see, Oryzopsis hymeneoides. And it looks best if you plant it like a specimen plant. And so you put it out kind of by itself, maybe with other plants around it, but so it can fill out like a big basket. And it's really beautiful. It's one that the Native Americans use the seeds to make flour out of, but it's very delicate looking. It's a great plant. It takes 2 years often to get established. So don't get frustrated if the first year you don't see the grass plants coming up. Often it takes 2 years, but it's worth it. It's worth the wait for. Another thing I love is the deep magenta blooms and the silver hairy leaves of Bessie's local weed. It's Oxytropis bessii. And bumblebees and bees really love this plant. It's a good plant for your pollinators. And I'm going to finish with what we know down here is Cowboy's Delight, and it's Sphera alcia cocina. And it's a very common native in Southwest Montana. and it's also known as the scarlet globe mallow. Its flowers are bright orange, and that's a great color to have in your garden. You have a lot of yellows, maybe some reds, but that bright orange is really nice. And it contrasts with, it has grayish greenish foliage, and they say it brightens every cowboy's day down here. So it's always been called Cowboy's Delight down here. And so I wish you luck with your plantings. And again, my contact information is on chat. So if you're interested in any of these, you can get to me and I'll get back to you with the details. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
All right, Linda.
All right. Okay, so since I'm on the theme of seed and seeding landscapes, seeding native landscapes, I'm going to talk about one of my favorite grasses to seed, and that is Idaho fescue. I've had a lot of luck with that grass, both in dry places and in places that have a little bit more moisture where you might be irrigating. It's a good bunch grass, so it's not going to spread with rhizomes, and it's not going to crowd out as much your forbs, and it does have tiny little seeds, so you have a lot of seed per pound. So you want to make sure when you seed that you seed quite lightly. I measure out like 1,000 square feet, and I only use about 1/2 pound to 1/4 pound, and even that's a lot. And then add in the wildflowers to that. But I use that, if you know, that's kind of a monoculture grass, but I do use that sometimes by itself with the wildflowers. So Idaho fescue. And then as far as the wildflowers go, there are 3 that have been the best for me over and over again, the big 3, and you're probably really familiar with these, but one is blue flax, and the other Linum lewisii, prairie coneflower, Retibita colonifera, and the blanket flower, which is Gaillardia aristata. Those 3 are easy to grow. They're easy to get, you know, from seed dealers. They come back. They just perform really well for me. I use a lot of other forbs, but these 3 are the ones that are kind of the main ones. And I do reseed them after a few years because they're short-lived, unfortunately, but they continue to produce seed on their own. Plus I supplement, and then I do a lot of other plants too, like lupins and echinacea and monarda, penstemons, and some of them I actually plant in if they're kind of more difficult to grow from seed. So those are my favorite plants. Of course, I have tons of others, but those are the ones I just for seeding I would recommend. And as far as references go, I was going to show you a couple books that I really like. This is called Prairie by Candace Savage. And this is not a how-to book or anything, but this is going to give you an incredible idea of how prairies evolved from the very beginning. And it kind of gives you an idea about time. Like you read this and you're like, oh, wow, like I'm supposed to do this in 1 year. Like I need like 1,000,000 years. But anyway, so this is a really great book, and I'll put it in the chat. And then a better sort of more how-to book. There isn't really a good one for our region yet. I haven't found, but this is called Urban and Suburban Meadows by Catherine Zimmerman. And it has a lot of great practical illustrations and things about how to establish seeded grass areas, seeded meadows and prairies, and a lot about maintenance too. So that one's a good one. And also we have our Native Plant Society website where we have a landscaping section. And in that section, we have some references that our chapters have done. And our chapter in Bozeman did one in 2008, and it has a lot of really good information. Some of it's outdated, some of the sources and things like that, but it has a great recommended species list with all the native plants that we feel are, in cultivation, and a lot of information about their water needs and growing needs and stuff like that. So those are good things to look at. And we also have our source guide, which is just recently updated. And that will give you sources for seed dealers in the state. So that's a helpful thing to know as well. And we have general articles in there that I'm hoping that we'll keep adding to. So we'll have more specifics about some of the things we're talking about today. in written form. So for just for Montana and just for our plants. And right now there's a new one on water-wise grasses that was just put out that I thought was very informative. So, and also our Valley of the Flowers chapter is going to have a field trip on July 12th, and I'm going to lead it, and it's going to go to 2 of the landscapes I designed. One is at the Museum of the Rockies, where I did a small native garden. It's not seeded, sorry. It's not seeded, but it's planted, and it has all my favorite native plants that are easy to grow are in that garden. And then also at Langer Park, I did a pollinator garden quite a few years ago. And so you can kind of see a more mature planting. So anyway, those are 2 great ones to see, and hopefully maybe you can come to that field trip and I can talk more about native plants. Okay.
All right, on to Beth MacFawn. You have to unmute.
Thank you, sorry. One of the favorite natives that I forgot to mention was the prairie smoke, Geum triflorum. It's got a beautiful, like, smoky red blossom that seed produces this beautiful airy seed, and then the foliage in the autumn is beautiful reds and oranges and bronze. It's a great plant. And for resources, of course, the Montana Native Plant Society, we have great resources, as Linda mentioned, under the landscaping tab. There's also one that I'll put on the chat. It's based out of Wyoming. It's called, it's a research and education group of regional professionals in the industry, but there's a lot of research in the universities around the region. So I'll put that on the website. It has a great plant resource guide and descriptions of specific growing habits for native plants. And then, as other panelists have mentioned, understanding your soil is very important. And the NRCS has the web soil survey online. You can enter in your exact location and it will create an analysis of the soils and what plants can grow there. And then if anyone's in the Big Sky area, the Historic Crail Ranch has a demonstration garden of native plants. It's a small little space, but it's packed full of Montana natives. So if you're in the Big Sky area and it's self-guided tour, you can Google the address and location and have a little picnic out there, but it's a great little space surrounded by condos. So, and then the MSU extension, as other people have mentioned, has a great wildfire and drought resource page. And that can be another resource for people. And as Linda mentioned, the water-wise grasses on the Montana Native Plant Society website under the landscaping tab is a great resource that Toby Day and Tracy Dower from MSU and the extension field studied native grasses for lawn use for turf. So that's a great one. And as Linda mentioned, the Valley of the Flowers chapters, our landscaping with natives is a little outdated, but it's a great resource. And also Helena has a similar packet that has similar plants that would relate to this area of Gallatin County. So thank you.
All right, Shiva?
Yeah, you guys already talked about many of my favorites as well. um, I also jotted down bee balm for fragrance, deer resistance. It's rhizomatous. It's good at naturalizing. It's a good pollinator plant. I really love echinacea. I think it's kind of iconic and an essential pollinator plant, and it's medicinal. I love nodding onion. A lot of the plants I chose have kind of an emphasis on deer resistance. And really we tell people that no plant is deer proof because we've really just seen them eat everything and anything if they are determined enough. But some of these tend to be more deer resistant. And nodding onion is one I love. I just think it looks like a cute little fairy plant, and it's also edible. You can sprinkle it on salads, which is nice. Prairie smoke, which Beth just talked about, is one of my absolute favorites. The color is unique and the seed head is really different. It blooms really early. Alum root, which is a Heuchera cylindrica. This one is interesting to me because it's kind of, it doesn't have a particularly showy flower. It's kind of more of a subdued beauty, but I think it has really interesting leaves, and in the wild you see it just like growing out of rock faces, and it's really adaptable too. Like it can take all different types of light. So I use that one a lot. Wild blue flax, of course, yellow prairie coneflower. And I mentioned rosy pussy toes. I think that's a really great ground cover if you're looking for a spreading ground cover. As far as resources go, I already talked about how centerfornativeplants.com is a really good educational resource itself. And one of the things that I use the most is under our Get Gardening tab. There's a subheader called Plant Selection, and they, the nursery staff has over time come up with these awesome PDFs that break down species selection by category. So there's a PDF for drought tolerant plants. There's a separate one for deer resistant plants, a separate one for rain gardens, a separate one for deer or shade, bird friendly, medicinal. Anyway, I refer to that like almost every day, so I recommend it. As far as books, I think a good starter book, it's not necessarily relative to this area, but getting familiar with planting design in general, is the No Maintenance Perennial Garden, KNOW, by Roy Diblick. It's kind of an introduction into lawn conversions and how plants grow better as communities rather than individual plants, you know, plopped in seas of mulch or gravel. And then this is more like psychological, spiritual, but I think everyone should read Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. That has more to do with native plant wisdom and its connection to native culture and the benefits of kind of connecting yourself to plants, be it through a forest or a veggie garden or whatever. Yeah, that's it for me.
Great, on to Giles.
All right. Well, a lot of great plants were mentioned. They're all worthy of being workhorse native plants. As you know, I'll add some ones that I like to use. Trees. I've been really into 5-needled pines, the white pine and limber pine. They do well from pretty small. They can grow pretty cool forms. For shrubs, we're about to have the service berries bloom on our mountains, our local hillside. So it's always really exciting for service berries. And they're the, you know, obviously the first thing that usually comes out besides the wax currants and things like that. So service berries, and they really can take a beating. We have a service berry that's in this like dry, forgotten area across the street, grows along a fence and loves it. it's meters tall, and so service berries, and I think mock orange, if we're talking about shrubs, mock oranges they just reseed like crazy all over the place, and they're one of our late blooming shrubs that smell really good. So in terms of the shrubs, if we're gonna go to grasses, I have to put in a big plug for prairie June grass. It is my logo grass, but it's the only representative of its genus in Montana, which is just awesome. It's just like, so it's a solitary representative, and it really holds form for that. And it also is a tough guy. I think it can take pretty low water and can be ignored. Most of the plants that do well in my yard do need tough love, once established. I think that's one of the great things about native plants is they can take tough love. And I'm just, I kind of fly around with what native plants are the flavor for me of the time, but I've been really enjoying the Apache plume. And if you look at it, if you guys know what an Apache plume is, it looks just like a prairie smoke, but it's white. It blooms like multiple times a year. Its seed heads are the Dr. Seuss thing 1 and thing 2 hair, just like the prairie smoke. And it can grow meters tall, and you can have it at eye level. So Apache plume it's a really big, it's pretty resilient too. And so Apache plume would be a new favorite, I guess. In terms of forbs, I think ones they can just be ignored and do really great in our late season is Maximilian sunflower. Maximilian sunflower, once established, is just the toughest thing around. It reseeds like crazy. And I have birds chewing, yumming and harvesting those seed heads that overwinter. I mean, until they fly away, they're harvesting those Maximilian sunflowers. So those are, I guess, some of my favorites. I mean, we all could go on and on about the favorite plants. I will say I'm just starting a native plant nursery called the Mount Jumbo Nursery. And one of the things I want to do is try to bring in native plants that are underrepresented commercially or by seed, but that do really well, like bracken fern. Bracken fern, I know it's a weed for some people, but it's a native plant that's like super tough and deer don't eat it, and it's big. And so why isn't there more bracken fern for sale or for offering out there? So that's one of the things I hope to put a dent in. Thank you.
Excellent. All right. Well, I hope the attendees are checking your chat there, because they've shared a lot of websites and information for you that you can take notes on from the chat, or how to get in touch with people.
I will say I forgot to reference. My reference is Peter Lessica. I don't know. Everyone should know Peter Lessica. He's the only reference you really need. He is my neighbor, it turns out, so I don't have to go far. But Peter Lessica is all you need for your Montana native plants. Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, that's the Bible. Yeah. All right. So we had a lot of people pre-submit questions that were really excited to get their questions in back a couple of weeks ago. A lot of, hopefully they've been listening and may have gotten some answers to some of their questions about certain plants and such, or websites, or where to learn about different things. But I'm just going to start off. I'll read a question, and whoever on the panel feels inspired, 1 or 2 or 3 of you can maybe go ahead and pitch in your 2 cents on it, and we'll just see how it goes here. So the first one is from Sarah in Moscow, Idaho, and she's asking how to best add the good drainage that so many native plants need to the rich clay soils in our yard. Adding sand is risky as it comes with too many riparian weed seeds. Anyone want to comment on that? Catherine, you need to unmute yourself.
I don't know.
Phil,
There you go.
can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. So what I do, I live near the Big Hole River. And if you live near any rivers, there's sand accumulates on the sides of the river and at the bends and everything. And I go down there and get sand. It's good sand, I know, and use that. Plus I use gravel also from the same areas. And I lived in an area once that did have a lot of clay. And so I dug it in basically. So and just tried to enrich it with that and to make the drainage better. So, but then you can also plant natives that will grow in clay. So, you know, there are a number of natives that will grow in clay just fine. So, and I have neighbors here on the Big Hole that I've worked in their yards and with the clay, and it's possible. So, anybody else?
Yeah, I haven't had to work in clay. We have clay on the west side of town here, and you know, I'm mending it, just trying to have a nice top surface to plant so the plants can take the good stuff down through the clay as the roots grow down. So I always try to think of inoculum, and it's just so much work to mix in any kind of sand or gravel, or so it's almost easier just to make a nice surface situation and then let the plants grow through.
Great, thank you. All right, Janice in Bozeman wants to know, are there any secrets to extending the lives of native perennials that are known for short lives, such as Lewis's flax and blazing star? Anybody?
Yeah, I don't think you can make a plant grow any longer than it it kind of is meant to grow. Those are kind of just short-lived, and I think it's because they bloom so long, they kind of just wear themselves out. And I just, you know, you replant, or else you know, I just, yeah, kind of accept that about them.
And flax really reseeds itself really well.
Yeah, that's
Flax
usually what you
reseeds
do.
itself really well, and blazing star too. I mean, they'll come back. So
Okay.
I mean, it won't come back. They'll be growing again. They'll grow from new seeds. So
And also from Janice, she says, I know that native plants are tough and one of their survival strategies is allelopathy. I know of only one native allelopathic flower, Maximilian sunflower, and she wants to know, are there more?
all the helianthus, all the sunflowers are allelopathic to some extent, and Maximilian's is the worst in terms of how far it extends from the plant. And I read about this because I really like Maximilians and I like nettles also, sunflower. And they said like with Maximilian, it extends at most 12 inches out from the trunk of the plant, and they grow pretty big. And so 12 inches isn't really that far. I mean, you can have other plants all around it and it's not going to affect them. So you're not going to really see effects of that as you would opposed to say sagebrush. And then nettles is less, and almost all the others, even our native annual one, I know this has the same effect, it has an allelopathy, where the roots are secreting chemicals that prevent germination of other seeds around them. So basically it's the plant's strategy to get all the water it can for itself. So, but it's not that bad really. So.
All right.
Lupin is also allelopathic.
All right. So April in Whitefish is asking, my husband would love to get rid of our terraced lawns to reduce water and mowing. I do love the look of a lawn and don't want to replace it with a pile of rocks. What are some creative ways to make this look like a native plant scape? And I think you guys have cited a lot of resources, but did anyone want to comment on that?
I can comment on that because I do this all the time in terms of, you know, the thing with grass and lawn grass is it takes a lot of effort to dig it out and to scalp the situation. You know, for a lot of people that want new landscapes, honestly, most of the effort, probably 60 to 80%, is in the preparation for the plants you want to put in. And so a lot of time, the easiest thing, depending on access, is to smother the grass. So if you put 6 inches of material on almost anything, nothing can grow through it, even if it's the campanula, the garden cancer that we have here, or even some other aggressive plants. You can smother them, usually with like a layer of gravel, and then you can put soil pep on top of that gravel and then plant into that. And that's the best way. Then you just have to manage the margins of the grass wherever it interfaces with whatever landscape's currently there. So I'm a fan of smothering because you just save the step of all the labor of trying to take out what you don't want.
All right. Any other comments about that. Let's see. Okay, Amy or Ann in Gallatin Gateway near Bozeman has a 10-acre field where she recently built. The ground has been disturbed. Weeds are coming in. The outer field is clean, native grasses, which my neighbor has kept clean for years. I also seeded some wildflowers, blue flax and yarrow, which came back. How do I get help identifying what to weed when the plants are young before they go to seed?
You just start learning, your weeds. And I mean, I know that from my own land here, and there were things that were coming up there in the mustard family that I didn't even recognize, but I hand picked them all, and eventually I got rid of them all. So, but it's just a matter of learning. And there are pictures that you can find online that show you the first stages, like the dicot, when they first come up, they'll show you what they look like as opposed to some of the grasses. And some of them, like especially like with quackgrass and those things, if you pull on them and they've got a really hairy, brown looking hairy root system to them, they're that's a bad grass. So you just start working with what you have there and learning to recognize it. And it's a process, but I mean, that's the only way I know how to do it. So anybody?
I think the NRCS has or the Gallatin Conservation District here in the county has people that can come out and assess your space if you haven't seeded already, and they may be able to provide assistance on helping you to identify what are weeds. As Catherine said, there's resources. You can go to the montanaweeds.org, I think, to find the list of the noxious weeds on the state list and try and learn that way. But the NRCS is a great resource that people should also utilize. They have, program for pheasants forever that someone will come out and, look at you. If it's a big area and you're wanting to bring in like birds or create deer habitat or other things, they're a great resource.
Great. So Francis in Wilson, Wyoming says, our regional nurseries sell several non-native, often European species, which appear to be very similar to our local native species. Some examples are mountain ash, maple, ninebark, currants, and asters. What are the impediments to growing and selling the native species instead of or in addition to the non-natives?
I don't see there's any impediments to it. I mean, It's just anybody can order from growers of native plants. Nurseries can order from growers of native plants. And if they want to, sometimes there's incentives for them not to do that because they can get cheaper prices from some of these huge growers like Monrovia and some of these other big corporates. But as far as getting the natives in, it's possible. It's totally possible wherever you are. There's a good, in our Native Plant Society site, as we've been talking about, there's been an update on sources, and you can see all the different nurseries that carry native plants in your area. If you want more, you just have to ask them. They know who to call. They've been given the information. The information's right there on site, and they need to see the interest in it. And as long as they don't see the interest in it, they're not going to order. They're going to do what's really easy for them to do. And so we all need to be people that promote native plants. If you want native plants, you ask for them. You keep, a squeaky wheel thing, and you can get them then. So I'd like to see more diversity of native plants available, and that's possible too. But there has to be a market for them, basically. And what happens is that a lot of the hybrids or the non-natives that we were talking about, there may be some aspects of them that may be more interesting to people, like more colorful, or maybe they keep their berries longer or something like that. Or especially like with mock orange, we have all these hybrids and different species of mock or subspecies of mock orange out now that have bigger flowers. That maybe they don't smell better, but maybe they look better to the buyer, and so they're going to go for those rather than going for the native mock orange. So you have to balance that out and say, which would I rather have? Your pollinators are adapted to the natives in your area. And what happens with a lot of things that have come in, especially like butterfly bush and some of these things, they look great to the the garden grower, but they aren't even attracted to the pollinators. The pollinators aren't keyed into them. So that's something that's really important to take into consideration. I could go on and on. I'm going to quit.
No, here. This is good. Good points about the benefits of natives. Yeah. So Angie from Bozeman says she's wanted to plant Rocky Mountain juniper in the yard. She thinks the birds favor it. She's found it a bit challenging to find it without it being a cultivar. How hard might it be to grow from collected juniper seeds? Anybody?
I haven't ever done it. I've actually had a successful transplant with a tree spade. We transplanted like 40 from one part of the ranch to around the house. And that was very successful. We also transplanted silver buffalo berry. I would suggest maybe the Bridger Plant Materials Center. They provide seedlings, I believe, and they may have, it'll be small, but you could start small and watch it grow.
Was it the DNRC in Missoula? Who is it that the grower in Missoula? Yeah, isn't it the DNR? Yeah, Giles, Yeah, I mean, you can get fairly good size bare roots from them and grow those. And they grow fast if they're watered, so they grow really fast. So
Giles, did you want
I
to?
haven't had any luck
elaborate?
growing them. Yeah.
Oh, I mean, yeah, they grow fast-ish. It's still a tree, and trees grow frustratingly slow usually. So that, but
Oh, we can't hear you.
Yeah.
Oh,
if you are going to transplant like a tree, you don't want to kill the plant. And so usually if it's in like a road cut or something, that's like I think that's a safe area to get a transplant, would be like a Forest Service road cut, because they'll come through and mow those down. They're supposed to eventually. And so you just want to if you can't bare root it, if it comes out bare root, that'll work. Or you want to try to just get the drip zone and try to go as deep as the plant is tall. And so those are kind of rules of thumb for transplant.
All right, thanks. Dee in Whitefish is asking about, she's got the box elder that provides summer shade for her house, seems to be dying. What native deciduous tree species are good for planting not far from a septic tank and next to a building?
This is a tricky one, I would say.
Yeah.
As far as native deciduous trees that our nursery carries, I mean, aspen and paper birch are what we have the most of, but I would not plant aspen in that situation. And you could consider birch, but up here they tend to really love a lot of water. I think that's something to consider.
Is that too wet for bur oak?
No, actually, bur oak.
Because I have bur oak planted right by our tank, and it has a tap root, goes straight down, and it makes nice shade.
Yeah, that'd be a good idea, or to consider maybe a larger shrub, something like Rocky Mountain maple.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Now we're still up in the northeast part of the Flathead Valley. Kate says our land has very sandy soil. We would like to establish shrubs and trees for windbreaks and wildlife habitat. What tree and shrub species do you recommend? Is watering necessary to get them established? If so, for how long? And is mulching and or fertilizing recommended?
Where was this?
Up in the northeast part of the Flathead Valley.
Will buffalo berry grow there?
I think it will.
Yeah.
Lots of willows is what I would say. Elderberry would probably do well.
Yeah.
And
willows
roses would be good, things like that.
Yeah, wild rose. You'll be sorry.
seem like they're gonna need water though. They're gonna need water for a while. I don't.
To get established, to get established. And then buffalo berry,
down here.
flood them in the springtime.
Yeah, and if it's really
they're
sandy,
blooming, and then they'll grow. They grow great in sand. So
What
Yeah.
about mulching or fertilizing? Probably not.
Yeah,
I mean, I think adding the top dressing is never a bad idea, just for moisture retention and things like that. So it just depends on what the mulch is and how, you know, they can keep an eye on it for weeds.
All right. Here's one that asks about soil amendments. Jan and Doug and Helena have some small patch of ground in front of their new residence, and they're wondering about soil needs, and they want to add some native shrubs and perennials. There's a spruce tree out there and a few perennials, but they want to attract birds, so they're looking at things like currants, gooseberries, dogwood, red willow. However, the soils these natives grow in would be so different than this landscape mix. What can you recommend for amendments, if any? Does that make sense?
not exactly. No, I just think that it's kind of, I don't know, I like to be able to grow something without having to amend it where I live. And so, but where they are in Helena, they could even have like, I don't know, it could be like granitic, I don't know. So I think if they just started planting, they might have some success with that. So I don't know what they really need to amend it. I mean, they just have to look at some things require more richer soils to it. Then, I mean, basically I have like sand, but if you live someplace that has some loam or something like that to it, that has organics to it, and some plants need more organics than others. But when we're talking about some of these shrubs, some of our native shrubs, they do pretty good. I mean, without having a lot of amendment.
I find that for a situation like that, the larger they go, like you can buy a 15 or 20 gallon dogwood. And if they're able to plant something that large, plants that large that come in pots are usually pretty resistant to stress, I find, while they're getting established. So my advice would be go big.
Oh, yeah, that's great. Yeah. All right.
As
And
long as you
also,
don't have them, yeah.
yeah, we mentioned our website. We have a Helena specific native landscaping PDF that's on the landscaping section of our website. So it might have more Helena specific information for Jane and Doug.
I know one shrub in the Helena area, wax currant. I don't know if someone already mentioned Sarah. Yeah, that would be a good one for that area as far as berries for food
for birds.
I love wax currant.
Mhm.
Wax currant is the only thing in our area that moose don't eat.
Really?
Incredible. Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. Yeah.
Amazing.
I don't know
Okay,
why.
well,
but
I
And
don't
now,
know too about. Oh, go ahead.
you go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say maybe chokecherry, but I think chokecherry, you need to be careful with where you're planting it if you're okay with it naturalizing and suckering all over.
Aside. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. And someone else wanting to convert lawn to native meadow. So same theme, but so Katie and Helena says, what's the best way for a homeowner to convert a lawn to native meadow? And we've covered some of that, but she's asking, would this decrease the curb appeal for resale of the property? We might have different opinions on that. And the prospect is intimidating, but I have so much lawn that sucks up water. So.
Yeah, maybe, start small, like I said, don't take all of it out at once, but just do little sections at a time, and maybe put some of it into planting and some of it into like some seeding, native seeding.
Right.
That would be my advice.
All right.
I would offer in terms of curb appeal that grass will be a thing of the past before we know it. And those of us that start our native plant gardens now and they're established in 20 years, when the water wars begin, their resale will be higher than anybody's.
Mm-hmm.
Amen. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And then another Niska is in Hot Springs, and she's beginning the move, she says, from lawn to nature. But she wants to know some suggestions for plantings, like maybe clover, she's asking, that could be seeded into the current grass, which is patchy and weedy, to help the soil recover. Something that she can mow and allow the cuttings for help. the cuttings to help for mulching. So any thoughts about that? Something to seed into current grass?
Hmm.
You could do white
I don't
clover. I mean, it's not,
Yeah,
it's not
clover,
a
generally
native,
the-
but you could do.
yes, it's
Yeah.
not native and it's
Yeah,
pretty
no.
aggressive. I wouldn't, I don't know, that's clover's not really a native way to go.
No, it's not. No.
I use a lot of prairie coneflower. I just throw it in and it just
Yeah.
fills in those little gaps, it's amazing. And
Mhm.
little bits of native grasses too, as well. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right, good idea. And then Sally says, how does one control native wild roses? They spread like crazy. I wish I had that problem.
Ah,
I have that problem.
Yeah.
it's a hard, it's a
They
hard.
actually, native rose, they pull out pretty easily. You just have to have, I actually have a pair of gloves that I use for like fire pits. They're super thick. And then I just go to town on the rose and you can just yank them out and just leave one stalk and, show it who's boss.
All
I cut
right.
them every year. Yeah.
Yeah. And then we've got Linda in Missoula. She's got this spot in her yard that she's been wanting to add a grouping of shrubs. It's near some spruce trees. It's been covered in bark for about 4 years. So it's mostly shaded. It just gets some morning sun and limited overhead rain. She's up in the Rattlesnake, maybe by you, Giles. But it gets really high deer traffic. The purpose is to create more habitat for birds. So the question is, what are good native shrubs that are deer resistant, attractive, moderately sized, and do well with 2 to 3 hours of sun?
Wild roses. Yeah.
They like wild roses too.
Yeah, I know. It's really hard underneath the spruces.
That's a hard thing if you
That's
have a
the
lot of deer.
problem, yeah. The only thing I grow under spruces are the Jacob's ladder.
Yeah.
They grow underneath the spruces. They do pretty well.
Juniper grows in the
Yeah,
shade.
that's right. Yeah. But it's not the panacea that she wishes for. So
Would Oregon grape?
Birds like, as a nesting and berries and stuff. So,
Yeah.
I don't know about Oregon grape. I haven't had a lot of luck with that where I am. So
Uh-huh.
I don't have enough organics. It needs organics. So
Somebody in the comments just suggested snowberry, but
yeah.
okay. Here's
Yeah,
the last one of our pre-submitted questions, and we can look at what the audience is up to. Aaron from Missoula says the Norway maples in our boulevard are dying. Any native species preferences for boulevards? Any experience working with the city tree people?
in Dillon, we have our city tree now is the bur oak. And they switched over to that because of the fact that it has a taproot. It's not prone to blowing over. It has an upright growth form, so it doesn't have the spreading oak form where the branches break in an ice storm. So that's what we've gone over to, and they're using both the regular bur oak, and I think they're using a bur oak gamble oak cross. They're using some other cross too, and that's our tree group in town. And we're a tree city, so.
I want to know who's the tree guy in Big Timber. You guys don't have probably a tree arborist. Missoula has a new tree person. The city arborist, his name's Ben. If you have a boulevard tree, there's a pretty specific list that you have to refer to. They will provide you trees. The city of Missoula has a nursery, and they do give boulevard trees for replacement. I think they only have maybe a dozen different species, but they have a pretty good selection. And then there's another, 3 dozen that you can pick from a list.
Great. Well, that should be very helpful. So I'm going back in the audience questions now. And Alexandra, after listening to Linda, she asked about how best, and I think she lives over in Sweetgrass County, how best to knock out brome grass and reseed with native grasses best on a 12-acre pasture. And by this brome grass.
That's a really hard situation. Without herbicides, if you don't use herbicides like Roundup to kill it, I honestly think that about all you could do is just a lot of tilling, but that's just going to make it worse because it's going to keep, cutting up all the roots. That's a toughie. You might just have to kind of accept, again, what we've done sometimes with that is just do small areas where you kind of smother out some of the brome, and then either by suffocation, like we said, mulching if you want to go organically, and then try to just plant in some flowers and, native flowers. So at least you have some pollinators and some diversity, but it's probably one of the hardest things to get rid of that I've found. Even I did 30 acres where of seeded ground that was, it was like a grain crop. And I have little patches of brome that have come back from probably 10 years, before that, the grain was put in. So it's an incredibly persistent plant. So that's a hard, I think all of it would be pretty daunting without some kind of major chemicals. Yeah.
I know Peter Lessica's voice is ringing in my ear. I know he's told me that the only thing that beats smooth brome in his mind is a shrub or a tree. Smooth brome's kind of the climax species for its, for among its kind. So shrubs and trees might be just planting some good, having some good areas and then working out from those.
Yeah.
There are some perennials that will grow in brome. I have seen them, some native stuff, but
Yeah.
it's hard.
And then Connie, I think in reference to your mowing and such, Linda was asking, how do you time seasonal maintenance in a native yard with ensuring you retain environments for pollinators to overwinter?
I'm sorry, I missed that. I didn't catch that.
Well, how do we time seasonal maintenance with ensuring you retain environments for pollinators to overwinter?
You put it all in a big pile. Like if you're deadheading or if you're pruning and doing all that, I just have this big pile way out back that where all my butterflies and everybody else can overwinter. So caterpillar.
You can also do your mowing in the spring too. Put it back later and do your big mowing later.
Yeah.
It's just sometimes when there's a lot of heavy snow, it gets packed down so hard. It's really hard to get rid of the grass if you don't mow it in the fall. So.
And you get fungal growth too. So yeah.
I haven't really seen a big decline, and I've done these in a lot. I haven't seen a big decline in pollinators. I don't think that it's really hurting them. I think they're figuring out a way to kind of coexist.
Okay, well, we have only about another minute. There's still lots of comments and questions and such, but I do want to mention Patrick Plantenberg is our president, and he said, can you please plug for interested people who want to join our Native Plant Society Landscaping and Revegetation Committee? And we've just had a period where that committee was kind of inactive, and we have this overwhelming interest in native landscaping and native plants. So we're really trying to rejuvenate our committee to be able to do more outreach and help people. So if you're interested in that, we're also at our annual meeting. If you're going to the annual meeting, there'll be a committee meeting for that committee there. But what would be the best way? I think on our landscaping page, is there something, or Linda, do you know, how would they just reach out to you?
Well, on the website, it should have our officers and stuff. And I think that, is there a landscape committee chairman?
Yeah, I think so.
I guess that person would be the one to contact.
Yeah, or it might be Patrick right now. So.
Right? Yeah.
So, but you can go on our website and please consider getting involved, because there's so much interest and a lot of great outreach, and everybody's trying to do good work. And the more we share, it's just so helpful to everyone. So we didn't get to all the questions, but hopefully you feel more connected to our native landscaping community, and you have some new resources to investigate and help guide you. in your landscaping decisions. So again, I really want to thank the panelists for taking time to be here. And then also thank you everyone for coming. And we'll just go ahead and say good night. So thank you
Thanks,
so much.
everybody. Thanks.
Yeah.
Good night.
Thank you.
Um,
Thank